Hello.
Hello,
How are you? Can you hear
I'm
me?
good. Can you hear me okay, Paul?
I can hear you perfectly. How's life?
So pretty good, pretty good. I'm just finished I'm about to finish a movie, so a movie score.
Oh,
So
cool.
I'm actually flying to England on Wednesday for a mix.
Wow.
So yeah,
That's
I
class.
get to finish that and move on to the next project.
Wow. What's the movie?
It's a Chinese romantic comedy called Moonstruck. It's
Okay.
supposed to come out in May, I believe, early May. So, yeah.
So is the score all like Chinese ethnic music or is it classical
Oh,
or what?
no, no, no. No, not at all. As a matter of fact, they come to me typically when I work on Asian movies if they're looking for, more of a Hollywood type of sound.
Okay.
So no, this is mainly orchestral and soloist and things like that. Yeah.
Oh, that's class. So you're
Yeah.
where are you doing the score? Is it in England you're recording the score?
We recorded in so this thing was recorded in multiple places. We did the jazz. There's a jazz band section that was recorded in New York. We recorded strings in Budapest in Eastern Europe,
Oh, lovely.
um, and all the solos were recorded kind of it's remotely. So some in LA, some in Florida, and some in Tennessee, as a matter of fact,
Wow.
depending where the players are. Because over the years, I've collaborated with so many different players that I'm, very comfortable working with. So yeah, so and then we put all that stuff together and then mix it in England. So yeah.
Oh, lovely. Have you recorded an Abbey Road?
Oh yeah, Abbey Road multiple times. Yeah,
Oh
been
man,
very
that is
lucky.
so
Yeah,
cool. That is
yeah.
so
I
cool.
I think the very first time I went there wasn't for a project of mine. I was assisting another composer, but I think it was back in 2008. It's the first year that I went to Abbey Road in the big studio in Studio One. And
Wow.
then over the years, I've had the privilege of recording there as an assistant, as a consultant, as a producer, and then eventually as a composer and as a conductor, both in Studio One and Studio Two.
That
So
is so cool, man. I'd say that room just sounds incredible.
yeah, have you ever been there?
No, no, it's on my
No.
list. I have to, I have to do it. I keep even also even though I've never been to Liverpool, which is a shame. So I have to do the Liverpool there and then go down to London to Abbey Road and stuff. I had meant to go sometime, but I just, the way life is, I just never went. But
Where are you located?
I'm in Ireland.
You're
My
not that far.
no, no, there's no excuse. No excuse. It's just
Yeah.
But so were you a Beatles fan or were you?
Well, I was always. I mean, I wouldn't call myself a fan in the sense of, as I said before, I had a more of a traditional slash classical type of upbringing.
Hmm.
So musically, at my house, it was more about Beethoven and Mozart than it was about popular music.
Hmm.
The only But the only album that my parents had, I think, of popular music, certainly of English, of popular music in English, was the Beatles, was the Red and Blue albums.
Ah.
And that was the first, one of the first, my first taste of popular music for me was that. And so it might sound bizarre to say, but the fact that even my parents listened to the Beatles should tell you something about how popular they were. Um, so and I learned that it was actually my dad's album. He bought it when it came out.
Okay.
So that's the first time I heard when I listened to the Beatles. That's the first memory, I'd say.
Hmm.
Um, and I was always. What's interesting is whatever it says about me, I was always more um, the song that really spoke to me were the most traditionally structured, if you will, with a very strong melody, and that were maybe not experimenting as much. So, for example, we Hey Jude or Let It Be
Okay.
or Yesterday. Those that have a very, in a way, a very clear structure for my ears. Listening now, what's amazing when you when I listen to the Beatles now is the breadth of sounds and experimentations that they
Yeah.
did, and yet still within the realm of popular music. And that's, as a composer myself now, that's really what I find really interesting.
Mm.
But yeah, that was the first. That was the first time I listened to it, and then I kind of, went into another direction, and film music kind of became my passion. That's really what I listened to a lot when I was a teenager. And when the Beatles released finally on iTunes, the Red and Blue album, there was like for many years they weren't, on the digital
Yeah,
platforms,
yeah, yeah.
and eventually you could buy them. And I bought the Red and Blue album, my own digital copy,
Yeah.
and then I listened to all the songs again. And it was kind of like a 20 years later, or whatever it was, 15 years later, kind of a way of just going back to that and thinking, well, I feel like I've been missing something. But again, I wasn't. It's always been there, obviously, but it wasn't that big of a thing. And so when this whole thing happened, with Paul McCartney, I didn't really think about it that much.
Yeah. It must have been cool though. In hindsight, you full circle, you're now on the Red and Blue album as conducting the last
Yeah,
song. Like that is kind of surreal in a way, isn't it?
yeah. It
Wow.
it it is, and when you look back, it's always weird how those things happen because you can't plan those things. You
Yeah.
can't. I mean, I guess you could if you were a big fan of the Beatles and big fan of pop music, and you decide that's something that's going to be an avenue you want
Hmm.
to pursue. So you start as a runner in a studio, for example, and you do everything you can to be in that environment, and eventually you find yourself within where Paul McCartney comes in for a session, for example, right?
Yeah.
Um, so you can't plan it, but you can kind of help yourself along the way by
Mm.
going in a certain direction. I didn't go that direction at all. I didn't go into the pop direction at all. Yet, because of all the different people I worked with, it kind of just ended up happening, weirdly enough.
Wow. How did you didn't know obviously that was for a Beatles song. You just thought it was probably a Paul
No,
McCartney project.
yeah, and I didn't know anything specific even before I showed up the day of the session. I
Okay.
was, yeah, I was only told that it was for my friend Ben Foster, who co-wrote the strings arrangement.
Mm.
Is the one who was supposed to conduct the session, and because it was recording in LA, he could not. He could not conduct. He couldn't get a work visa in time to be able to conduct, and
Okay.
that's why he emailed me and saying, "Hey, there's this session coming up in a few days. I don't have time. I'm going to be there, but I don't have time to get a work visa. So I'm not going to be able to conduct it. Would you be able to?" And because it was very confidential, he didn't tell me who it was for. He just said it's for one of the most iconic British artists. And with my little knowledge of popular music, I didn't think about Paul McCartney. I didn't dwell on it for too long, but basically I thought it was either Elton John or Mick Jagger. Basically, it was just
Okay.
like that's just two names that came to my mind.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm the job is to show up
Hmm.
on time and be ready to conduct anything they throw at you because I hadn't seen the chart, I hadn't heard the music.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I didn't know until I opened the door and came into the booth and saw Paul McCartney there. But even
Yeah.
at that moment, officially, it was not a Beatles song. It was just
Uh-huh.
a song we were recording for Paul.
Did you know that song beforehand, the Lennon
No,
demo or oh so you didn't? Okay.
no. I knew nothing. Certainly now, reading about it and the whole uh, gestation of it and how long it took, and the
Hmm.
fact that it was on the anthology, and that they had tried to work on it. There were some demos that had been heard, that the true fans,
Yeah.
knew about. Had I known about that, then it would probably have made sense
Hmm.
hearing it. But because I knew nothing about any kind of outside of the main, outside of whatever was released, I didn't know anything about any additional songs. So no, I couldn't. I couldn't put two and two together.
Right. So what was it like when you actually heard? Because when you were doing the song, were you were purely recording the score to a click, or had you any of the backing music? It was just, or was it just a score?
So we heard the I heard in the booth the vocal. I heard John's vocal,
Ah.
but I didn't know. It wasn't clear to me that it was. They explained to me how they got the vocal, that it was isolated, and they were able to figure out a way to get it
Hmm.
by itself through what they call a time. Um, a year
Mal,
and a half ago, we
mal.
well, a year and a half ago we didn't talk about AI. We just talked about machine learning. And so
Ah,
Mal
okay,
kind of made sense within
okay.
that realm. Now we just talk about AI because it's a better buzzword.
Yeah.
But so they had said that they were able to isolate it, but it wasn't clear to me if it was going to be the main vocal, if it was just going to be a portion of it, or
Hmm.
they didn't say it was going to be on the final song. And I had worked on projects in the past, not me as an arranger, but I've worked on projects where, they're able to get the original vocal for a recording, say Frank
Hmm.
Sinatra,
Hmm.
and they kind of put a duet on it, and it
Right.
works, but it's kind of like, it always felt a little kludgy. So I just wouldn't know what to expect. I certainly didn't expect it would be that good, it would be that genuine and that well thought out. And so at the time, my job is again, is just to go there and conduct. So I hear the vocals, oh, that's interesting. But my thoughts are, what's the chart? What do I have? What am I going to conduct? Because I basically have 20 minutes to look at it before I show up on the podium.
Ah.
Um, on the podium, what we had in our headphones was just the backing track, but we didn't have the vocal. So we had some drums. I'm not sure they were the final, like I wouldn't be able to say, but there were some kind of drums,
Hmm.
some kind of guitar. There were some things that were laid down already.
Mm.
I don't know if those were the finals or not, but the musicians never heard the vocal.
Oh. And how many players were there? What was the ensemble?
I can't remember. I'd probably be able to find it, but I would say probably 20 people, something like this. 20
Okay.
players, 20, I would say, give or take, probably, let's see, maybe 15, maybe 15. It's not a
Hmm.
big section, but for that kind of stuff, it's kind of like, it's fairly typical because it's not the main part of the track.
Right, right. So like when you actually heard the final track when it came, were you just like, wow, that is just was it kind of a bit surreal just hearing it back?
Well, it was basically a week before they released it. They started having that marketing thing where they announced it's coming next week, and they,
Yeah.
they say the name of the track, and they had a little. I can't remember if they already had the behind the scene documentary, the Peter Jackson video a week before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Something like
can't
that.
remember, but I remember when he announced it, I texted Ben Foster, the arranger, and I said, "Is that the song?" Because I've been waiting for it, for a year and a half, basically.
Yeah, yeah, it was a good
Um,
time, wasn't it? After it
yeah,
came out.
because I think that was May 2022 we recorded it, and it came out in November 2023. Um,
Wow.
so they had said at the time when we were doing the session, they had said that they were hoping to do uh, be part of some kind of a box set or something. That's what I understood anyway.
Hmm.
That November of 2022. That's what
Oh,
I thought
right.
I understood. They were being um, fairly, it was blurry. It wasn't
Yeah,
very, it wasn't like set in stone. But I
yeah.
thought, oh, that's gonna be interesting. We'll see when it comes out, and it didn't. So then, a lot of time, I've worked on a lot of projects, including songs, where you do the full thing, the whole thing is produced, and the song never see the light of day.
Really?
That's happened. That's happened a lot to me in the
Wow.
past, especially on if you're working on an album. If an artist is working on an album and they might be recording 12, 15 songs, but they
Hmm.
only end up selecting 9 or 10.
I
And the
get you,
one you
yeah.
worked on is not selected. So it just becomes, it goes in the vault basically.
Hmm.
That's happened more than once to me. So I would not have been surprised if nothing came out of it. the
Yeah.
thing that's dead buried forever, because they might realize, well, we don't want to do this, or I don't know.
Yeah.
Um, so when it was released, it was a surprise because I kind of had forgotten about it, and I
Yeah.
was working on something else, and then I see this, and I'm like, wow, that can be it. And then eventually, you see the music video. I mean,
Yeah.
first the documentary, then the music video, and the whole thing was, yeah, it was just this big, massive whirlwind of emotions. Surprise, of course, at first, and then it was really, really great vibes for a few days because a lot of people saw it. You realize the reach of the Beatles.
Yeah. It's huge.
Everybody basically was talking about it for a week.
Yeah.
And I got messages left and right of people saying, "Is that you? Is that you?" I was like, "Yeah, it's me." So yeah, it was quite a gift, I must say, yeah, to be able to be involved.
Yeah. And it's the last song. It's just the
And
last
it's the
song.
last song. Yeah.
It's
And I mean, someone told me I thought it was funny, but at some point, so a friend of mine who's a big, big, big fan of the Beatles, and he was like another composer, a friend of mine, and he's like, man, the Beatles, it's like that's for me, it's the most, like, for me it's John Williams, for him it's the Beatles. It's like it's always been that massive pinnacle of creativity and in the musical realm. And he was saying, dude, you're conducting in a music video with the Beatles. It's like you're the fifth Beatle. And I'm like, come on. Let's it's just one song. But it's true that being in the music video, where it kind of hit me was, I still watch music videos from 25 or 30 years ago.
Mhm.
If you look at the big ones, obviously, but Michael Jackson, you watch it still
Mhm.
today. And so it's not just being part of the record itself, which mostly I know because I'm not credited. It doesn't say conducted by, nor should it. It doesn't matter. But I would be the only one to know. On this one, being on the music video is it's kind of like it makes it real in a way. It's not just me. It's
Yeah.
like, it's okay. Clearly, I am in it.
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
this did happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Ah, it's cool, man. I'd say you've just got like so much, because once you're in the world of the Beatles, like, everyone are such massive fans. I'm sure we've
Mm-hmm.
got many people messaging you apart from like people Obviously, I message you, so there's loads
Yeah.
of people. Have you found that it's actually been quite good in the aspect of getting more work?
Oh, I wouldn't be able to say. I think it's yes. I've definitely had a lot of people messaging me, doing interviews and things like this.
Hmm.
I'm really a small part. I mean, this is not me being humble. I'm really a very, very tiny part of it. I
Yeah,
see myself more as I'm part of the band in a way. I'm in a sense of the strings
yeah,
ensemble. Um, and even what you hear, really, it's not me, it's the players. I'm there more as a facilitator, not a manager, but I'm there to make sure the session,
hmm,
everybody's ready, the
hmm,
session happens smoothly. But I'm not creatively involved in the creation of the track. So the work, it's more of a technical job, if you will.
yeah,
But so yes, it's really nice, all people reaching out to me, but I try to keep it honest in terms of what it is, the work that I did.
okay,
In terms of getting work, it's more like a lot of my clients, a lot of people that I know have reached out, and there's kind of like a legitimacy that comes with being on a session like this, because you wouldn't have been called if you weren't right for the job.
I get you.
So, so I think that's something that's the positive, if you will, work wise, is you're there for a reason, and I think
Hmm.
people know that, interestingly. But yeah, it's just been 6 months, so
Yeah,
we'll see what happens.
yeah, yeah. So. so when you're like scoring your own music out, are you using, do you notate it on paper? Or are you using like Sibelius or any programs like that to do it?
Yeah, I write in Logic Pro. That's what I use to compose. And then it just really depends on what the needs are. So say I do something that is mostly orchestral,
Hmm.
and if I have the budget and I'm lucky enough to record the whole thing, then yes, we'll take whatever is in Logic, whatever is going to be replaced by real instruments, we'll put that into Sibelius, and then create the parts and get the
Okay.
musicians to play it. I do write by hand melodies, themes, ideas that I may have. I have a notebook filled with with
Oh, brilliant.
little notes and stuff.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I do. As I go along as I'm scoring. I'm traditionally trained, but in film music, especially, there's so little time to write the score
Hmm.
that you're not able to just really intellectualize your ideas by really
Gotcha.
thinking it on the big score. Um, even if you go back, even if you go back in time, 20 years or 25 years, kind of pre-computers, if you will, before they were really available to everybody
Hmm.
all day long. Um, the composers, Jerry Goldsmith, even John Williams, they sketch their music, so they have a sketch paper, and it's not the full orchestration. They write the lines, and then they give that to an orchestrator that kind of spreads it up,
Yeah.
vertically, if you will.
Yeah.
So there's always been a lot of shortcuts like this because you don't have time to write every single note on the paper. For me, my sketch is in the computer in a way,
Right.
but yeah,
I remember the first time I worked with an orchestra. I was doing my first album, and I went to Malmo to play with do with the Malmo Symphony Orchestra, and I was so scared because it was the first time I'd written for an orchestra. Like I'd never really written for that many players. Like if everything you write, they're gonna play. If you
yeah.
write it wrong, obviously in your head they're gonna play it wrong. If you know what I mean. So it was, but it's the it's the most amazing feeling when you hear an orchestra play your music. Do you remember the first time you heard just a whole string section orchestra playing your music?
So I can go back. If I go back to that very first session at Abbey Road,
Mm,
that was the first time I was assisting another composer that I was working for.
mm,
But we had been working on that score for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and I had done all the mock-ups. I had all that stuff. So I didn't write the music, but I was very involved with the nitty-gritty.
yeah,
And when we finally show up, and I think we had typically when you pick the first cue you pick, the first piece you pick is something that features the whole orchestra so that the engineer can balance the sound. So we had
yeah,
picked something that was really simple to play, really nice, warm sound, full sound. And we had the full orchestra in the room. We had brass, we had all that stuff. And they played the first chord. And I remember being one of my best friends was there with me. He was copyist for the session, and we looked at each other. It was our first session like this, and we were like, "This is incredible." It's
yeah,
just yes, the what you it's not just hearing live what you've been working on for so long, but it's just the physicality of it, of
mm,
just hearing hearing your live players. I don't think there's nothing can replace that. I strongly believe that.
yeah,
It doesn't matter how good computers get at it. Um, because it's not just that the players are amazing, it's that players are in a room, which is a great room as well. We have a great engineer, we have amazing speakers, in the booth. It's controlled environment, that's the only thing you're listening to.
yeah,
So there's a psychoacoustic element to it too. It's not just it's kind of like it's better than the sum of its parts in a way. Once you put it all together and you're being there in the moment, and they're performing it in the way that makes sense to them based on their knowledge of music.
yeah,
And so
yeah,
it's an amazing, yes, that moment, that's you get all that stuff and
yeah,
more at the same time. And even today I could, a lot of projects that I work on, I could, if I wanted to, keep them all in the computer. It could be all synth. The producers because of budget considerations, the producers are fine with it being in the box.
Hmm.
I make it a point to record as much as I can. And whenever I do, every single time I do, even though a lot of time it comes from my own pocket, every single time I do, I know I made the right choice
Yeah.
because it's just you just can't replicate that feeling.
Yeah, that's it. As great and all as string libraries are, like Spitfire and Vienna
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of them, there's you there's no different. It's like night and day. When you hear them on their own, you're like, that sounds great. But then when you
Mm-hmm.
hear it, you're like, okay, that doesn't. It just you cannot replicate that. Not yet. Maybe in the future. I don't know, but just not yet. But just not yet.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It's when you hear it by itself, it's fine. I certainly live with it. It's been in many. I've done a lot of other TV shows where it's all fake
Mm.
orchestra, and it's if you watch it on the TV, most people wouldn't know. I even wouldn't know, and I did it.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
just like it's not just that it's so good, but there's all this sound effects going on and dialogue, and it comes from shitty speakers on your TV, so you're not going
Yeah.
to hear the difference. But if I were to play you both real and fake, you will hear the difference. And part of it is what you said about the libraries is so interesting because yes, the libraries are very very good, but typically they're all recorded in different ways.
Mm.
Sometimes you might be able to get all Spitfire, but some libraries are going to be better than
Yeah.
others. Some libraries are going to be recorded in different rooms, different engineers. And then when you put all that stuff together in your template, you send it to some kind of reverse. So it's kind of like a mashup of a bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Even for just strings, if you look at my template, I have strings from Spitfire. I have my own custom sounds. I have stuff from Spitfire. I have Albion. I have Symphobia. I mean, I'm just saying a bunch of developers, right? But
Hmm.
if you look at my template, it must have been just the strings must be five or six different developers. And I put on stuff, and it sounds good. It's fine.
Yeah.
But once you take all those lines, orchestrate it properly, and give that to an ensemble in their room together and they play together, you cannot replicate that. I'm
No.
just sorry you can't.
Yeah.
Because again, the balancing is they're balancing, they're making sure that the lines are coming across. I always give this example because for me, a great example is, in a score, when you have a decrescendo. So it's they call it a hairpin, right? It
Hmm.
looks like a little triangle. And if I have to recreate that in the computer, yes, I can just have a little automation, little fader, a little fade out that looks like this, right? But what does the curve mathematically? What does it really look like? Is it flat?
Hmm.
Is it like this? Is it like this? Or is it an S curve? It's not very clear. And it's going to depend the instrument. It's going
Mm.
to depend the context of the line. And more than that, say you have a horn player, as they get softer, the timbre changes, right? So you both have to work with what we call mud wheel or modulation might help us to change the timbre, but then it's like you kind of work with volume and modulation.
Yeah.
And so you're not doing this kind of like you're trying to reverse engineer what a real player would do. Like, how would they do it? It's like, I don't want to do that. I'm not a horn player. I'm
Yeah.
not, that's a job. That's something to learn how to play your instrument. That's something you do for 30, 40 years. I'm never going to be there. So I'm trying to make the computer sound like this. Whereas if I just put that note and that hairpin and give that to the player, they'll know exactly how to do it
Yeah.
based on the context, how far along they are in their breath, in the line, based on what the other instruments are doing. All that balancing is happening in real time, organically in the room. Whereas when I do that in the box, I have to do all those things separately. So yeah, I think it's just and it's in the end, yes, we're lucky because we have all those sample libraries and it's in a way it's cheaper. But the amount of work that it requires us to do when the players will just do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
You can kind of get away with it sometimes if you do, like if you have uh, uh, um, would say a string sample section, but you put like a few real players over it, you can kind of actually
Hmm.
get away,
Yeah,
like you
yeah,
can do something like that as like it's almost like you're padding the background. But as
yeah.
you say, there's just no different. There's a huge difference of like even people, if you have an ensemble, they're not everyone's going to be slightly playing a different time to each other, microseconds, which all adds to that whole breadth of everything and the wit to it.
Hmm.
And they've got a soul. I think it's the soul is probably a big thing of it. It's just you just can't replicate it.
And to go back to that Beatles chart of the song, the fact that they hired a string orchestra to the fact that they had a string chart, but they hired a string orchestra. Nowadays, they still do it, but nowadays lot of those songs is just in the computer.
Mm,
And but the energy, the emotions, the originality you'll get from having that small string ensemble will make all the difference. It will make
yeah,
all the difference.
yeah.
Some style of music, obviously, it's not part of the vernacular, if you will. It doesn't matter as much, but I think certainly for the Beatles, it matters a lot.
Hmm.
Um, I think we tend to forget how important it is getting real players to do it, and that's a shame because it makes such a difference.
Yeah. Like even in the 60s of like Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, when you look back at like do you know much but like the Wrecking Crew, all those people
Hmm.
playing together in the room, it's just the sound of those records, you're just
Hmm.
incredible. Or like Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, like just those
Well, yeah,
records
I mean
sound
it's
phenomenal.
I mean, a perfect example, Motown. There's a great documentary called "Standing in the Shadow of Motown." I don't know if you saw this, but it
No,
talks about
no.
the band. It talks about all the players that were basically employees of Motown Records and played on all the most well known tracks, albums of Motown artists.
Oh,
And all it's
cool.
always the same musicians
James
basically, right?
Jameson and like, oh, James
And
Jameson just rocking
and
on bass all the time.
what's incredible is sorry about this,
No, 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 it's cool, man.
Paris.
It's cool.
But what's incredible is that those people that a lot of people we think about the artist, the main artist, we might not think about the band, right? But the band is such a massive part of the sound,
Hmm.
and those back we call them the backing musicians, but they're really a massive part of the sound, and they created this anchor in time of very and it's the band, but it's also the engineers and the way it was done. It's kind of like people kind of forget about. A lot of people don't think about Quincy Jones, for example, but Quincy Jones is the sound of Michael Jackson in this period, this time period, maybe 10 years, 10, 15 years. But
Yeah.
that he's responsible for that sound, and he would hire always the same musicians, always he would record always the same place, always the same engineers, and that becomes
Mm.
a characteristic. Um, it's such a massive part of records for sure.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the Beatles for sure with George Martin. There was a certain way of approaching a record that gave that continuity in terms of sound and even when they experimented, it was within a very specific context.
Yeah. Even on like in my life, that solo, the piano solo, they use that very speed where you play that a really
Yeah.
slow thing and then slow it down. It's kind of sounding like a harpsichord. Like those little kind of things are quite interesting. So I know are you okay for a bit more time? Because
Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah,
okay, okay,
yeah.
right. I was like, shit, man, it's 40 minutes gone. I was like, damn, I didn't even ask.
So what do you? Let me ask you this: What? So do you? What's your relationship with music? Are you a performer or
Oh
producer
yeah,
or?
yeah, I compose and I mix and all that kind of stuff. I'm just finishing off my latest record. I had one out 10 years ago, but I had weird hearing problems for like 6 years. I woke up one day and my hearing was all like gone to one side. I was just
Oh
weird
wow!
and had it for about 6 years. And I
Oh
thought, oh my
goodness!
God, when I just started my record that I'm finishing now, I just started it, and I was like. it was see me. I didn't actually have hearing loss. It was to do with my eustachian tubes, and then I got this thing called hyperacusis, which everything was really loud in one ear. So I couldn't really listen to music. I listened to classical music all the time or jazz music because anything that had actual, well, let's say a drum kit, the drums would be there. So it was really uncomfortable for me to listen to, like from a balance perspective. So I listened to a lot of classical music and like, which I listened to anyways. But yeah, so just the last few years, it's kind of started to come back. So I've been finishing off that, and yeah, yeah, I do music, not to the
And so,
extent of not a career,
what
unfortunately,
it,
but
the album you're working on? What is it? What kind of music is it?
it's ooh, it's slightly it's a concept album about like a dream. So it's called Moons Over Mountains, and it's done in four sections. So there's four sections of three songs and like movements. And I actually did an orchestra. I did an orchestra called the Fames Orchestra a few years ago.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
Macedonia. Yeah, I worked with
yeah,
them.
yeah. I
Yeah,
worked with them for the album, which was I got them just before they started doing all the good stuff for Netflix. I was pretty cheap, like for I was thinking it was there 2 hours of music. It was like 1,500, which was amazing.
yeah,
And there was like
yeah. For
12.
2 hours,
Yeah,
2 hour recording.
yeah. There was like 12
Yeah.
players. So musically, it's like some kind of poppy songs and some experimental
Hmm.
songs, some classical songs and a bit of jazz. And it's kind of, they're singing on it. And I'll send you a song. There's one song I put out.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And then I'm doing another album after that, which is more like a darker electronic-y kind of thing. So hopefully I can get three out this year because I'm trying to make up for lost time for,
yeah. I
for
hear
the
you.
few years. Yeah.
I
So
hear you. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
always
yeah.
trying. Yeah, it's always the like this year. I have two albums that I've been commissioned to write, and I'm always trying to say, okay, I'm going to take 3 or 4 weeks or 6 weeks and just really focus on them. And then
Mhm.
I'm not complaining, but then I get the more well I love that work too, but I get film score, for example, or I work a lot with Disneyland with the parks. So I get stuff like this which I
Mhm.
love,
Mhm.
and they pay the bills, so I love it even more. But sometimes I'm like, I wish I was able to just say, oh, for 3 weeks that's the only thing I want to do is the album. But I can't fully do that because you got to
Yeah.
make a living too.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's kind of like this fight between, in a way, something that's very very close to my heart, and on the other projects are still part of my passion. But it'd be nice to have a little bit more time sometimes to focus on just the albums.
Yeah, yeah. There's always that kind of dichotomy, isn't there? You're like,
Yeah,
but at the end of the day, like to be a working musician and having a career from it, and especially now, is amazing. Like, it's amazing.
yeah,
That's what everyone wants. Like, that's kind of the goal in life. To be able to do it full time is brilliant.
yeah,
Like, you know.
yeah. I feel lucky for sure, for sure. Yeah.
So when you were young, getting back to when you were young and you started off, did you start off playing piano or like did your parents were you made play piano or did you want to play piano? Because I know a lot of
No, I
people.
was made.
Oh, are you?
I was told to play the piano when I
Okay.
was six. That's what it
Okay.
was going to be. Um, and it's at the time I didn't really have a choice. My parent had a piano, and that's kind of what made sense was for me to play the piano. I was number four, the fourth kid to play the piano or to be told to play the piano.
Okay.
I kind of stuck with it because I didn't have a choice. I wanted to start learning the oboe when I was 11, I think. My mom said, well, you can play the oboe, but you have to keep playing the piano. Being lazy, I said, oh, fuck it. I'm just going to play the piano. So I kind of kept at it. And then eventually, I think music wasn't that big of a deal until I was around, I think it was 12. And I basically realized film music was something that existed in the world. And suddenly music became something much more interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and little by little, um, the piano became a conduit through which I could explore other things than just the classical music or what felt kind of boring to me at the time. it became more of a pleasure. I became less inclined to really work at it
Yeah.
and practice, but it became more of a conduit for pleasure, for emotional pleasure. Um, so that's kind of the way it started. Yeah.
So like more like you kind of writing your own music and your own ideas and stuff like that.
Yeah. Or with the piano, I could play film music arrangements,
Okay.
or I could play the fact that I could play something else than classical music, where you really had to be able to play it, you had to really practice hard. Especially, I got to a level where basically, if I really wanted to keep playing classical music, I had I started going up in difficulty, and and I was just kind of I don't think I was lazy, but it just wasn't for me to spend the amount of time that was required to really be good at it
Yeah, yeah.
for my instrument. And today, it's like I play the piano every day because that's what I use to compose. And a lot of the music that I write is either features the piano or is written really from a pianist perspective. Um, but I wouldn't. I'm certainly not a concert pianist. I wouldn't
Okay.
be able to play in a concert.
Y-
I would to save my life if I really have to. But
Yeah.
don't put the camera on me. Don't put the spotlight on me.
You're
For
not
sure.
practicing you're not practicing the rack three every day, no?
No, I don't practice at all. Unfortunately, I don't
Yeah.
practice. I don't have time. Yeah, it's kind of like
It's a different
once you start
discipline, isn't
writing,
it? It's a different
it is
discipline,
a
man.
discipline.
It
It
really
is,
is.
and it's a great discipline. When I just now I'm in Paris, so I don't have it. But when I bought a piano a couple of years ago,
Mm.
and I would practice. It was my first piano that I owned in 20 years.
Wow.
Um, Aside, I have a keyboard, but that's my first acoustic piano, and I started practicing. I pull up some of my old scores and started working through them, and it was extremely rewarding because it's kind of like playing sports. It's like exercising. There's a once you do it, the process is
Mm.
actually very, very, very rewarding. I thought, but then it's just a matter of there's only 24 hours in a day,
Yeah.
and I think that becomes more and more obvious as you get older and as you realize to be really good at something, you have to spend a lot of time on it. You can't just do like at least in my certainly in my case for in my career, it's something that requires a lot of focus,
hmm
and that requires focus requires saying, well, this I would love to be able to do, but it's not really part of the most important thing for me.
Have you found, now it's not always the case, but like, these amazing piano players like Horowitz and those guys, like they're technically and brilliant piano players, but they're they don't really compose music. Like it's a completely like all their attention has gone to just playing
Mm-hmm.
that at a super level. It's kind of like you have to choose, not you have to, but there is that one or the other thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Yeah, there's no question in my mind that to excel at something, it has to be your sole focus. It doesn't
Mm,
mean you cannot be good at something else,
mm,
but really, and a perfect example of that is Bernstein, and which they talk about in Maestro in the Netflix movie, but which I had heard about from my conducting teacher when I was in college, which is Bernstein would have loved to be more well known as a composer,
yeah.
and he certainly was a great composer. I
hmm
mean, he's an amazing composer. But whatever he did, he will always be remembered as a conductor first and foremost. He's a conductor who composed,
Yeah.
and it's because either by choice or not by choice, because that's the life he had, or because he was so amazing as a conductor that that's what everybody wanted out of him.
hmm
Um, and in the end, that's what he is. And in 50 years, 100 years, that's what we'll remember of Bernstein. And conversely, you have people like John Williams, who is an amazing conductor and an amazing piano player. Yet he'll always be remembered as John Williams, the composer.
Mm.
People don't really think of him as when I say John Williams as, oh yeah, he conducts, right? No, he's a composer.
Yeah.
Um, there's a story actually about John, which is he started in the studio business, in the film business as a studio player. He was a piano player.
Really?
Yeah, he's amazing.
Oh.
He's great, great. Yeah, he went to Juilliard
Oh.
and played the piano at Juilliard. And he started in the studio system. And what's interesting is, Peter Gunn,
Hmm.
the dun, 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 that thing with the piano at the very beginning. That's John Williams on the piano.
No way.
So
That's
he
cool,
was,
man.
that's who he was. He was a musician. And then eventually he started arranging. And at some point, the executives, the music executives came to him and said, "John, you're Johnny at the time. You're so good as an arranger. You should really consider doing more writing."
Huh.
And which at some point he did. And once he started doing the writing, the life of a musician, of a performer, kind of went away because the focus changed. And it was even there's I've heard stories of musicians, LA musicians who've known John for a long time, who said when he went on the other side of the glass,
Yeah.
when he went in the booth basically as an arranger and as a composer, there was for a few years there was kind of like a split. Musicians didn't like that because he's like, oh, he's better than us. Now he's a
Okay.
composer or now he's an arranger. Obviously now, so many years later, there's a huge amount of respect for John Williams
Mm.
from the musicians community, so that there's no problem there. I'm talking about this because I think it's once you start going in one direction and really putting your focus in it, it does require a certain amount of shutting down what you were doing
Yep.
before. But what you did before can and might even have an impact on what you do next. Um, when I started my career independently, the freelance musician, uh, I actually did a lot of orchestration for other composers. I would orchestrate their scores. So they would send me logic files or MIDI
Okay.
files, and I would have to make that work with an orchestra.
Hmm.
And I did that for 5, 6, 7 years, and I became pretty good at it to the point where I stopped looking for work. The work came to me. The phone would ring saying, "Hey, I've heard your name. You've been recommended by so and so. Would you be interested in working, orchestrating my next
Hmm.
score?" And it started being kind of a nice side gig. And I loved it because I love music. I love the orchestra. I love working with players. But eventually I realized that's really what I'm starting to be known for,
Mm.
and it does require a significant amount of time. Is that really what I want to do? And it wasn't. I wanted to be a composer. And so I had to start saying no to those gigs coming in,
Right.
orchestration gigs. And it was a choice. I knew I was going to miss out on some kind of income. I was going to miss out on some pleasure because it was really nice working on all those gigs. But eventually I just started saying I wouldn't take any new clients, and I would tell my current clients, yeah, I'll do it for you,
Right.
basically. But once you
Right.
start changing that kind of mindset, the universe has an interesting way of working. You just stop getting phone calls. Eventually, that kind of disappears. People don't call you anymore. Um, so, but I don't regret it because time wise, my energy and my mental focus really had to be into pushing the writing stuff. And any other gig that I took that might not be writing I always saw it as a stepping stone to get to the
Hmm.
writing.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think there's only 24 hours in a day really says this is I'd love to have the time to practice the piano more, but it cannot be a priority.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you find writing music it's not a strange thing. It's a great thing, but like some days you could play a C chord and you get nothing. And some days you can play a C chord and then you can get it just takes that same C chord you would play one day is completely different the other day. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
Mm-hmm.
there's just something strange about like everything when you do music about the mood you're in and it dictates of where you're going to go on that journey. Do you find when you're writing music, it's dependent on just many factors. It's not just the thing of just sitting down and I'm going to write something.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's so many factors at play. One is the mood you're in that day.
Hmm.
What are you feeling? You might not even be aware of it. Once you play that C chord, it's going to bring emotions that are very different one day or the other. That's one thing. But what I also noticed is if you give me four pianos, four uprights, from different brands, different years, different um, more or less in tune. One might be perfectly in tune, and the other one might be have maybe it hasn't been tuned in 3 years.
Right.
I'm going to get if I play the same chord, the same C chord, I'm going to get completely different ideas
Yeah.
based on which piano I played in, because it's just you're not aware of it, but it calls it there's a call to whatever is inside of you
Hmm.
that makes you react and create something. Think of ideas, think of a melody, think of the next chord, what comes after that C chord. Um, and so, yeah, that's people often ask me when you're not in music, well, how do you come up with the melodies? And um, to me, the basic answer is, well, it's kind of like you're asking me, how do I come up with a sentence when I speak to you?
Yeah.
It's I've learned, we've all learned to talk. It just happens that you might not have learned to write music or to hear music, but I can hear it because that was taught to me either academically or environmentally
Hmm.
or um, I think we're all kind of taught about hearing music because we listen to so much music. And if you ask someone with, sing a melody, come up with anything, they will come up with something. It might not make any sense, but they will come
Mm.
up with something.
Mm.
So I can come up with something and structure it, right? Um, but that's really what's amazing to me is how every day, every hour, you can come up with something. And in my job, I have to come up with something.
Mm.
I don't have a choice. So that C chord, if I'm working on a cue and it's a sad thing, or it's a sad, when I start, I have to go somewhere. I
Yeah.
can't just think, I don't know, what is this? How do I feel right now? I can't. I have to go somewhere with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I might not start with a C chord all the time.
Yeah.
Um, as a matter of fact, obviously, the chord you start with, the mode you're in, that's
Hmm.
going to be very dependent on the emotion you're trying to portray. My advantage is I'm being told by the picture
Hmm.
what I'm supposed to convey.
Hmm.
I'm being told the tempo in a way. I'm being told the inner rhythm. So I have a lot of parameters already. When we're writing an album, as you certainly know, it's pretty much up to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to
Yeah.
create that box, that sandbox to play in.
There's something kind of uh, cool and interesting though if someone's, you know, they're not telling you what to write, but you're writing to something else. You're writing to a movie, so you're not. It's not your wholly ideas of what you would do. So do you find that you actually it takes you in a different direction because you're writing to a script or something like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's remember what I said earlier about being having the time to work on my own album.
Yeah.
And the reason is because it's calling for very very different. I think in one way, film music is a craft,
Hmm.
and which hopefully, if you're good enough, you're able to bring some artistry into it, which certainly a lot of composers, very successful composers, are able to do. But it's mainly a craft. It's a collaborative medium, so you're not the only chef in the kitchen. There's a lot of cooks,
Mm.
and it's not up to you. At the end of the day, it's not your movie. You're part
Yeah.
of it,
Yeah.
but it's not your movie. It's a director's movie. It's a producer's movie. It's what their vision calls for. It's what the movie calls for once they shot it. Sometimes their vision is one thing and they shot something else. And so that's kind of like the skill set, if you will. When I do an album, it's very different because yes, especially the ones that I'm commissioned to write, there's a brief, but that brief is very very. It might just be like one that I did a couple of years ago was tension with strings.
Okay, so they can be vague, kind of.
The way you would approach tension with strings is going to be completely different than the way I approach tension with strings.
Hmm.
Now they hire me because they know my style, and they give that brief to me because they're looking for something specific. But yes, I will approach that with, I will use melody because I'm a big thematic writer. I will use the orchestra because it's something that interests me. It's going to be probably fairly big. The way I approach thematic development is my own. It's not something special, but it's the way I do it. So I'll approach that. But the nice thing is, other than that, it can be 2 minutes, it can be 3 minutes, it can start big and soft, it can start soft and then big, it can start big, soft, it can be whatever structure I want it to be,
Hmm.
whatever form. So I have pretty much complete freedom without that. Whereas when I write to a film, that's not up to me. The length of the cue is very specific. It's could be 45 seconds and 20 frames, or 5 minutes and 20 seconds. Um, that's not up to me. The structure is not up to me. Typically, it's whatever the story, whatever is happening on screen that tells me. Am I
Hmm.
going to start with something soft and with something big, or vice versa? Those questions are already answered in a way by the picture. If it's not, the director, the conversation with the director or the producer will lead me to that answer, because
Hmm.
they tell me, here, the picture is not giving us what we need, so we need to push it with the music, things like that. That's the conversation. The instrumentation, that's something that we agree, is in collaboration. This is the style that we're looking for. The emotion, we agree. That's the concept. So it's and then depending on the way it's edited, the way it's shot, I already have. John Williams said this. What John Williams or Spielberg, I can't remember, but they said the movie. This John Williams said the movie is already giving you, without any music, it's already giving you a tempo. You
Mm.
just have to let it speak to you, but it's already in there. So a lot of those questions are already answered for me. My, I think the way I'm really good at my job, the way to be good at my job, is to be creative within those constraints. That's what's difficult, and that's the challenge that I actually really love. Is how can I make this interesting, even though I'm acting under very, very specific constraints. And in
Okay.
some ways, I think
Mm.
it's similar to an architect. An architect has constraints in terms of the size of the building, what it's for, how many rooms, how many floors, how the area you're going to work with, whatever is around it. All of this is already given to you. What kind of building are you going to create within those constraints? So in some ways, I think we're it's pretty similar.
Yeah, yeah. That's something I find with especially a lot of older movies is the music is so integral to it. Like Bernard Herrmann, for example, on Vertigo, like that. Without that score, like the movie, it's a great movie, but that score is just incredible. And like John Williams
Mm-hmm.
scores and stuff like that. Do you? You're like really into melodies. Do you find a lot of scores nowadays are like some of them are just very like backgroundy kind of paddy
Mm-hmm.
stuff like I think that's kind of quite a shame given that what you can what movie music can like add to a movie or a TV show.
For sure, you're absolutely right, and it's been a big conversation piece in the film composer world for the past 20 years,
Hmm.
because it didn't used to be that way until the end of the 90s. It wasn't. It really was mostly about, every movie would have a theme. Every movie would have at least one theme, and then typically something for the characters, or a love theme, or some kind of sad theme, or they would be very melodic driven. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. But the main reason is, around the 90s, the way we write film scores changed with computers.
Hmm.
And thanks to computers and synthesizers, you could actually create something that was more eerie, or just about ambiances and atmospheres and stuff like that. It was very hard if you go back in time with film music. The way it used to be done is, the composer would see the film, then they would go in their studio at the piano and write the major themes, the major content, major ideas behind the score. And then the director would come in, and the composer would play those things on the piano for the director to hear. So you can imagine, if I'm going to play you something, I want to play you a theme. I want to play you a melody. I want to play you maybe a motif or something. And I can tell you we're going to be using this for this character. In that scene, we'll develop it. We'll make it bigger. I can make it really loud. I can make it really soft. That's kind of the way you would do it. You would watch the scene and play something along on the piano. But it has to be somehow melody or rhythmic based, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Or very, very strong sense of harmony, right? But once you put the computer and you're able to do mock-ups, once you're able to do demos, and once you're able to have those things where you press one key down and it just the whole soundscape is created, suddenly when I'm showing something to the director, I don't need them to trust me that when we get to the scoring stage, this is going to be a beautiful orchestration and it's going to be really lush and
Gotcha.
all that stuff. I can just actually present it. So I think starting in the 90s and the early 2000s, that made a switch and it created new atmospheres, new sounds in film music that did not exist before.
Yeah.
And once you had that, every director said, the themes and all that stuff, that's old school. That's the old way of doing a
Yeah.
movie. I don't really want that. And in the early 2000s, for sure, the first 10 years, there was a definite decision by a lot of directors to say, themes are dead.
Yeah.
And it kind of disappeared for 10, 15 years. Maybe the only one that kept doing it were the old school type of composers because that's what they did, and the directors that really wanted those, like Lord of the Rings, for example.
Mhm.
Obviously, the Star Wars stuff, anything that was based on a franchise from the past, obviously that would just happen. But we've had in the past 5, 10 years, we've had a callback to themes. It's coming back.
Mm.
It has come back, let's say, um, because it's something with the orchestra. The orchestra kind of disappeared for 10 years. A lot of stuff was just synth, ambiances, things like that. I mean, if you think about what won the Social Network that won
That's
for
I was
the
about
Oscar
to
for
say
best
that
score.
like that changed everything. After that, everyone was like
Yeah,
drony. Like it
that's
was
what
like
we want.
overnight. It was like overnight.
Well, it's also the problem with temping,
Yeah.
because it's in a temp, it's in a, the temp track, which is something that is done now. Pretty much every movie has a temp track. And the nice thing with music like this, and it's not a criticism of Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, but the nice thing with music like this is you can put it on anything
Hmm.
because it doesn't really say much. And so it lets it, which is not a bad thing about film music. It can be a good thing because it lets the movie tell you a lot of stuff, and that sound kind of creates an atmosphere that helps you sell it, right? But you can put it on so many different types of stuff. You can't put Indiana Jones on a lot of different types of music. You can't put Star Wars on a lot of bunch of movies. It's very, very specific. Whereas that kind of music is just easier to place, and so it ended up being in temp tracks everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's. But the same thing was true about Thomas Newman and American Beauty. Once Thomas Newman kind of like became really well known for his sound with the dulcimer and the guitars, and you just like it was everywhere, and
Yeah.
then everybody had to write the same thing.
Yeah.
So that's just Hollywood for you. It's once something is successful.
Yeah.
Um, but I'll give you an example of how themes are made a major comeback. Is if you look at the Marvel, the MCU, the cinematic universe, and you go back to Iron Man, the first Iron Man movie doesn't have a theme. And if you look at all those movies, basically until Captain America, none of them have a theme. There's no
Right.
theme.
Right.
They hired different composers. They were kind of going left and right. Um, and at some point in Captain America, they decided, well, we do want to have a theme. Alan Silvestri was hired to do this. And they kind of wanted a theme, but they didn't want it to really play out throughout the whole movie. And they had it at the very, very end, during the end credits. Um, and and that Alan Silvestri did a suite of the theme playing full blast, and that became very, very successful. That's what everybody wanted to hear. The suite in the album that that with that piece basically is what people wanted to listen to because it's like, well, we have a theme for him. And the next one, when they hired him again to do the Avengers, and once they hired him for the Avengers, then we need a theme for the Avengers,
Mm.
and he did, and that became the calling card of Marvel movies.
Mm.
It's just the Avengers theme, and I think it's a testament that Marvel was able to see it and it's like, okay, I think it's actually quite nice. And after that, they started asking for themes. So you have a theme for Ant-Man, you have a theme for Black Panther, you have a theme for Black Widow, you have a theme for all those characters because they realize it's actually useful, especially as we're creating this massive universe with all the different characters. And when I see that character, I want to hear their theme.
Yeah.
And people are going to be cheering in the theater if I hear their theme. So it came back.
Yeah.
And I strongly believe it will always be there. Like the orchestra will always be there, even though we're using a lot of electronics and doing hybrid scores and things like this. Those things it's almost like those things are true. They come back.
Yeah, you can't, they're kind of, some things are just irreplaceable when they're so good. Yeah, you know what I mean. So before I let you go, I'm sorry I've gone too long.
Well, no, no,
I'm enjoying
my
this.
answers are always like 20 minutes long.
No,
So
that's good, man. That's good. I'm enjoying this. Um, so I have two questions. Who's your heroes of well, not heroes, but like people that you really look up to with regards to, we would say in the film score world, that would be people that you look up to.
in this film music world, it would be John Williams. John Williams, because that was my first love, is the music that he wrote. It's kind of what made me want to do what I do,
Mm,
but also because of his work ethic. He talked about focus. I mean, he said it himself. He works every day of the week. It's a 6 days and a half, basically.
mm,
And it's just that's all he does. He's 92 and he still writes,
it's
goes
incredible.
to the office every day and writes music. And I think it's really, that's really amazing to me. Um, so that's, I thought it was actually almost a weight because I thought I had to write like John Williams
Right,
to be content.
right.
It took me a while to realize I had to write like me, not like John Williams.
When did you
But
figure
that
that
was
out? When did you figure that out?
about 7 years ago, actually, not that long ago.
Right.
When I started, actually, when I did my first album, my own album,
Hmm.
and I was basically able to do whatever I wanted. It's like, well, who am I really? And I realized that I would enjoy the process much more if I wrote like what came to me, what came naturally to me, what my voice was, and that kind of like allowed me to settle it. Um, but the work ethic is still something that I struggle with because I wish I had the same work ethic. I wish I could be as focused as he is. I think that's an amazing trait, and really one of one of the only ways to excel. Really. Um, so there's him, and then there's a few more people. In terms of writing, Jerry Goldsmith would be up there. In terms of managing a business, and being an amazing producer, and being also an innovator, I would say Hans Zimmer. I think his scores pushed the boundaries and changed film music forever.
That
And not a
Inception
lot of people.
score, that Inception score
Inception is
is
amazing.
brilliant, man.
Interstellar
Interstellar,
is incredible,
the
absolutely incredible.
cornfield theme is
Yeah,
just
Corky Chase is just yeah, he's but if you go back earlier than this, if you go back to um his Rain Man obviously, but um even The Lion King,
yeah, The Lion King is
anything where
good.
yeah, even he's I think he's an amazing composer. Now he has a big team of people working with him and
Hmm.
for him, a massive team. And so I think in some ways, depending on how much he wants to be involved on the score, he acts more as a producer than he does as a composer, say. Although he might have written a huge chunk of the music. But there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's just a different way to approach to skin the cat, if you will.
Yeah.
So in that, yeah, I think in those in the film world, and Alexander Desplat, um, French composer, who's twice Oscar winner,
Did he do
who's
Sideways?
done. No, he did. He did. was it Lady in the Water?
Oh yes, yes, yeah.
Recently, he won an Oscar for that. He won an Oscar. He works with Wes Anderson, so he did. He won for the Grand Budapest Hotel.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
cool
he
little
does
score.
kind of like a little quirky. Yeah, it's a great
Yeah,
score.
yeah,
And I think he's a stylistically he's definitely a big influence on me. But I feel very close to his style because it's a kind of more minimalistic, based on pianos and bells and celeste and strings and there's just smaller and little woodwinds and a lot of his scores are like that and I love that stuff. I think it's really great. And I think in many ways because he's a French composer was able to reach outside of France and first in UK and then to the US. I think he's a great, definitely an inspiration for sure.
yeah, yeah. So before I let you go, because geez, I've taken a lot of your
Holy
time.
goodness, yes,
Sorry, man.
yes.
Sorry. It's good.
That's okay.
That's when
It's
you know
okay.
you're having a good chat.
Yeah. Good
Um,
luck in editing this.
so what do you finish up now? You're doing that movie that you're going over to the UK to do, and have you any much other things you're doing? And
Yeah, so I'm mixing that movie and delivering it by the end of the month, and then I'm finishing a project for Disneyland for park in Anaheim in LA, fireworks show. So
cool,
that's going to be, yeah, it's going to be, it's just arranging, but that would be probably another 3 or 4 days in early April. And then right now, there's a couple, I'm hoping to get two more movies this year at least. So we'll see if those pan out. But if not, then it's going to be hopefully 100% of my focus on the albums.
great,
That's really going to be for the network. There's two albums, so which I'm really looking forward to. So
great,
that
man.
should keep it. I'm going to try to keep busy.
I was listening to that score you did. Was it An American in Austin? Did I get that right?
Yeah,
Obviously,
yeah,
Jane Austen, not Austin, Texas.
yeah.
You know,
No, no, yeah,
that's
yeah,
cool, man. Did you do that with the Budapest strings? Did they play on that one?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
right.
It's done. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
No, yeah, and the woodwind's done by Kristen Nagus, who's an amazing multi instrumentalist who plays every single woodwind you can imagine except contrabassoon, but everything else she plays.
Right.
And so she does all the live solos on that. Yeah, it's well, that's my fourth Hallmark movie score, and I'm hoping to get a couple more this year. So we'll see what happens.
Class, man. I thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate your time.
Of course,
Sorry if
of course. Thanks for
I
having me.
asked too many.
No, it's me. It's me too. By the way, it's like when you get me started on that kind of stuff, I can, I'm glad we were able to kind of, finish because I'm just like, once I get started, you can't stop me. So
I'm the
thank
same,
you.
man. I could talk about music all day because
Yeah.
it's there's something I just love talking about music. And like any type of music, I just love it, and especially with someone like yourself who's a composer. It's because I like seeing how different people. Because we all write in a different way, people writing to do it. But it's cool seeing how
Hmm.
other people write and how the difference in that, which I find kind of interesting. Because you talk to so many people and you're kind of all you're trying to reach the same end goal, but there's just a different people
Hmm.
have just different ways of doing it. So yeah.
Yeah. And we have different ways because of who we are personally, but also our experiences, the project we worked on, the people we worked with.
Hmm.
You just learn a lot of different ways, and you realize there's not one way, and that's kind of what makes it fun. Is you try to figure out your way. So yeah,
Yeah.
where are you located, by the way, in
Uh,
Ireland?
I'm in Sligo. It's the west coast.
Okay,
Just
all right,
beside the
cool.
beach, which is nice. So go surfing. Not
Nice.
today, obviously,
All
but
right.
yes. If you're ever in Ireland, give me a shout and we'll get an old
I'll
whiskey.
let you know. Yeah, I need to visit Dublin at some point. I'm hoping maybe this year. I need to. There's a couple of people I want to see, and I have clients in Dublin. So,
Oh, cool.
but yeah, we'll see.
Well,
We'll see.
if you get to the west coast, you have somewhere to stay.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it, man.
No worries,
Appreciate it.
brother. Hey, dude, thanks so much for doing
I,
this.
Thank you. Thanks. I appreciate it. And yeah, if you when you have it ready, let me know.
Oh,
I don't know
cool.
when you're planning, what your plans are for it, but yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Hopefully soon. soon. And people can
All right.
find you at where can the socials. I'll put everything in the
Yeah.
link, but
Yeah.
everything you want. If you want me to add anything, just let me know. Blah blah blah, all that stuff. So yeah, man, cool. Hey,
Sounds
it'd be
good.
cool to do it again, and just talk about like some like film scores we love and something like that.
That sounds good. I'd enjoy that.
All right,
Thanks, Paul.
brother.
Much
Hey,
appreciated.
cheers. Have a good day.
All right. Talk soon.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Bye bye.